All right, hard yarners. Don't you love that, Chloe? Look, I see you smiling as I do that. Is that something?
Look, I was a fan first, so I've played that line many times over in my head.
Hello, hard yarners. So, welcome to this week's episode. We are joined by Michael Arbon and Chloe Geddes as I think you are becoming one of our more regular guests as well, but co-hosting while Delby's at home with nursing a broken ankle. But before we get to what we spoke about and the topics discussed today, this episode is brought to you by alltradescover.com.au. If you're watching at home behind the lovely Chloe Geddes there, you can see the wonderful logo there, but All Trades Cover, they're going to help you get covered if you're a tradie. But what we're not going to cover at the moment is what you'll get covered. It's who can get covered. And basically, if you are a small trader all the way up to a large construction company, big business, small business, medium-sized tradie, whatever it is, if you need coverage in tool protection potentially or accidents on site, they're going to be the ones who you can get in touch with them. And the best thing about All Trades is, I only learned this recently, is most of them are tradies themselves who have come over to insurance. So they understand what you're talking about. They go out to site, they see the situation. They are not just box ticking exercises. They'll make sure you're covered very well.
Team of bloody legends.
Team of bloody legends. So get around the crew at All Trades Cover. Drop our name, Hard Yarns. It helps us. And when you help us, we can continue to deliver more content like this. This episode is also brought to you by Crafted Finance. Crafted Finance, they, as I've said a few times, became a little disillusioned with the banking system, but instead of walking away from it, they decided to help people get the best deal possible over the long term of the loan. They help you with your mortgage specifically, but they do help with assets, small loans, personal loans, car loans, those sorts of things. So make sure you get in touch with them. They're going to give you all of the options. They'll present to you all the cheaper options so you can pay less up front and all that stuff, but he will explain to you in detail. You will be paying more over the long term of the loan, etc. So they're very good. They don't want you getting screwed over by the banks, so they're going to present you with all the best options. Please hit them up. Use the link is in our bio. It's in our show notes. Crafted Finance. They're great people, like-minded, and big fans of what we do here and the topics we cover. So you'll really enjoy being involved with them. But we were joined by Michael Arbon to talk about the pandemic treaty and more specifically censorship. So, Michael, thanks for joining us today. What do we cover?
Cameron, thank you. It's been a pleasure. We had a lot of fun talking about the intersection of politics and the World Health Organization. A couple of somewhat dry topics, but hopefully I managed to humanize them for you and have a bit of fun. But we need to understand the reality that politicians are human and they don't love to accept responsibility. So it was lots of fun going through what the WHO's proposing and also all of the layers of censorship legislation that already exist in Australia, but why we should continue to fight that, because free speech is number one. We must preserve our speech. If we can't speak, we can't fight for anything.
Mate, absolutely awesome to have you on. Good episode. And as well with Chloe, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
And without further ado, I don't know if you want to say it as well, Chloe.
It's been a while. Let's get hard.
Let's get hard.
Welcome to Hard Yarns Podcast.
I am fucking fat.
Anything Chris White says, please disregard it.
5D is actually a state of being. It's a unity consciousness.
That was Hard Yarns with me, Frankie Rose. So I'm going to throw it over to your co-host,
Daniel Delby.
And Cameron Branch.
I would do this and then I'd gong.
Free in attendance for the millions listening at home. Let's get hard.
Welcome. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for having us or coming on, mate. Really appreciate your time. So for people who don't know who you are, maybe give a brief explanation as to who you are and what you're here to talk about.
Yeah, lovely to meet you, Cameron and Chloe. It's I've observed a lot of your work, but it's lovely to see you sort of face to face via this system. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 3 young kids. My background's in agriculture, fitness, and finance. I've run my own finance business for the last 10 years. I got thrown into politics in 2022. I ran for the Senate in South Australia. I missed out that time, but Senator Babbitt, he recruited me straight after that and said, come and work with me. So for the last 3 years, we've had a lot of fun in federal parliament. Haven't landed many wins, but we've landed a lot of blows, and we've sort of just taken the philosophy that it's our job to reveal the truth, to ask good questions, and just to really try and get the general public interested in the political process. If you're not taking an interest, they will walk all over you. So it's on us to stand up and take responsibility for ourselves and get involved. So every day is good fun. Never have to hold back, taking a lot of risks, but trying to do what we discern to be the right thing.
Yeah, nothing wrong with taking risks. Chloe's become aware of that recently when you're very vocal about your opinions and, well, not opinions, concerns. And what we've been talking about specifically on the podcast quite a lot. You do get a little bit of backlash from time to time, but that's great that you're doing that. So what specifically are we sort of focusing on today? Because this is part 2 in a series on the pandemic treaty that we've been covering.
Yeah, so we're going to touch on, obviously, the recent actions of the World Health Organization and how Australia ties in. I'll try and give a bit of political perspective on, what the new pandemic agreement and the international health regulations really mean for Australia, and whether our politicians are making decisions that are in our best interests or they're deferring responsibility up higher, and how it intersects with domestic legislation as well. There's an awful lot of bills that pass Parliament every sitting week. Most of the general public have no idea what's happening, and most of those bills don't change your life tomorrow, but it's a long-term impact that we look at when we're assessing legislation. And I'll try and give you a bit of an insight into the unintended consequences of everything that they do.
Cool. Well, do you know what I realised as well we didn't do in the first episode? Maybe for people who just are really genuinely unaware of what the pandemic treaty is, maybe we can quickly just broadly, I don't know if you're better to talk about that. Well, you did touch on that there. One of you guys explained the pandemic treaty in itself very broadly as to what it is and why we're signing up for it.
I'm happy for you to take it, Michael, because you're going to be
Chloe.
much better at speaking on it than I.
Look, I'm no legal scholar, but I've spent a bit of time going through the documents. Essentially, we have 2 things that we're talking about generally. So we have the international health regulations, which passed last year in 2024 through the World Health Assembly in Geneva. Mark Butler was there at the time, and he referred to them as a legally binding set of agreements. So he uses that word binding, which really concerns me as someone who sees legislation come through, because it makes me wonder whether our government is going to be beholden to the World Health Organization when it comes to passing domestic legislation around anything to do with health. And when I say health, unfortunately, health is not a narrow scope anymore. Health encompasses all sorts of things, including our environment, our animals, diseases, a really strong focus on pandemics and potential pandemics. And I hate that word potential, because the best thing that any government can do when a potential pandemic is coming is to wait and to listen and to think and to discern whether there is a genuine threat for the whole population or just some, those sorts of things. So we've got the international health regulations, which we have until the 17th of July. Is that right, Chloe?
Is the 19th
this year?
Yeah, and then coming into effect in September. If there's, we have to say no, we can't remain silent. That counts as a yes.
And the reality is, the odds of us saying no are very, very slim, because the government was re-elected in a landslide. They've got the numbers, and the opposition are generally supportive as well. So the odds are that'll happen. That doesn't mean that we don't apply pressure. We need to keep forcing them to think about this issue. If we go quiet, they win. So we need to keep up the pressure and continue to lobby them, even if we're not successful this time. It builds a foundation for next time. And then we have the pandemic agreement, which was recently agreed to at the 78th World Health Assembly in Geneva. It's also referred to by Tedros as a legally binding agreement, and this one works sort of together with the international health regulations to sort of force nation states to report on pathogens of pandemic potential. They talk about equitable and timely access to vaccines, which means rushing even more than last time, diagnostics, therapeutics, tech transfer, there's mentions of identification, all sorts of stuff in this pandemic agreement. So the short answer is, it doesn't change our life today. nothing changes with you or I of how we live our lives today. But the trouble with Australia agreeing to and ratifying these agreements is that sometime in the future, we're going to be held by the WHO to honour what they ask us to do. And that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, so that's obviously pretty interesting state that not just Australia, the world is going into, because there's how many member states are potentially signing up to this?
Oh goodness, it's somewhere around 177, I think, or like 100. It's between 170 and 190, somewhere between there. Obviously, a glaring absence.
Yeah,
following recent events.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Yeah, so it's obviously a pretty concerning thing. In regards to censorship, this is something that's been pretty prominent over the last 4 to 5 years specifically, we've noticed. And ourselves included have been censored for speaking truth and even just reading the World Health Organization's own definitions and guidelines. We've been censored. We've had that stuff taken off social media. What's the concern moving forward for you in that regard? Because communicating these sorts of issues to the wider population is pretty important, in my opinion.
Yeah, so Dr. Tedros himself referred to something called misinformation when he was applauding the fact that the pandemic agreement had passed a few weeks ago. The fact that he's mentioning that means that he's worried. It means that we have cut through and we've found a way to be able to get an alternate message out, or at least ask questions in the general populace through platforms like X or your podcast or all forms of alternate media that have now emerged. We've got new newspapers emerging. We've got Substacks everywhere, all sorts of quality publications. So right now we have a pretty transparent society, let's face it. Technology is our friend. The problem is, as you watch legislation pass through Parliament, you can see the screws slowly tighten on free speech. You've got misinformation, disinformation bill that, if you wind back to 2021, the Liberal Party drafted that. They were all for it. The Labor Party then boldly introduced their own version of it to Parliament. And it was only due to the public pressure that eventually the crossbench and the Liberal Party thought, oh no, we don't have the people on this issue, and they decided to vote against it. So Labor passed it through the lower house and they pulled it in the Senate. They didn't want to put it to a vote because they knew it was going to fail. So yes, we have some issues with free speech, but we also have a massive population now that understands the value of freedom of expression. We need to continue to encourage that. But I feel like we have made some progress, even though the government and the sort of the larger organisations like the UN and the WHO and the WEF are trying to clamp and tighten the clamp on free speech. I think the people want it.
Yeah. I guess my concern is that this idea, and we touched on it yesterday or the other day with Corey, in regards to under the guise of a good idea, under the guise of protecting us. There are people who do say some and put out some very harmful misinformation. I agree. Like I completely understand that. I'm sure we're probably guilty of it ourselves at times.
Well, we're in a content climate, and the more extreme the content, the further it's going to travel. It's like unfortunately, a byproduct of engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is what they're using as their I guess, their excuse as to why they need to be using censorship. So they'll put this idea of, if it's something as simple, not as simple, but something like anti-Semitism claims as a reason to censor speech and have an ability to be able to choose what they believe is misinformation, etc. So how are they using this idea of helping us and protecting us to censor truth?
There's probably no better example of that than the hate crimes legislation that passed Parliament earlier this year. So hate crimes was inspired by anti-Semitism. It was designed to combat that. And the government used that caravan example in New South Wales, where there was supposedly a bomb in a caravan with anti-Semitic messages, which turned out actually to be untrue and like a fabrication, really. There was no real threat there at all. It was a false flag, if I can use that terminology. But that emotive moment was capitalised on to pass the hate crimes legislation, and there was an awful lot of pressure on politicians to support that. And sadly, both major parties supported that legislation. It's now law. And when you read through the bill, it doesn't just focus on anti-Semitism. It talks about sex and gender identity and all sorts of other protected attributes that aren't just being Jewish or just sort of praising a Holocaust or something like that. It goes well beyond, and it includes all of those isms. That is now law. And people aren't being locked up today for saying things based off gender or sex or sexuality, but that law's there.
Yeah.
And it's going to be tested one day. It's just a matter of when, right?
Yes,
I believe political opinion is in there as well, if I'm not mistaken, which is a terrifying
I think it was.
thought.
I'll pull it up while we're speaking, but I'm pretty sure it was.
Yeah, political.
Yeah, the idea that
opinion.
a government is beyond reproach in that way, that we can't criticise a government without it being hate speech, but there we are.
Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like, I actually say often that I think our government has what I call a God complex. That they've gone beyond that point of sort of understanding that the human condition is broken and they're not perfect and that we can't fix all of the problems in society, and they actually think that they can. They're so bold that they think they can actually solve the unsolvable. Most issues they try and solve with legislation would rectify themselves in time if you just let the people sort it out. Humans have a great way of resolving their own issues over time. We don't need government intervention all the time.
Oh, that sounds almost like health and exposure and natural immunity.
Perhaps. What is it like being in those environments? I know that's a bit of an off-topic question, but I'm interested because I think there's you mentioned it, but this kind of disconnect between the Australian public and our government officials and representatives. So as someone who's in that kind of circle now, like what does that feel like?
The first thing I noticed when I first started working in Canberra was that they're all just people. They're no smarter than you and I. They're no better than you and I. And often they actually have less discernment because they live in that Canberra bubble. So in the Senate, for example, you've got two levels of senators' offices, level 1, level 2. On the top level, you have the media. And I believe the majority of those senators walk around wondering what the guys upstairs are saying about them rather than worrying about what they should be doing or not doing for the Australian people. I think a lot of politicians would surround themselves with yes men and women, people who just say yes, sir, and don't really question the status quo. I take great pride in always challenging Ralph's opinions and telling him when he's being an idiot, because that's my job. And you do that at risk of being sacked, but he respects me and keeps me around for that because you can keep him level. That is the job of an advisor, is to say the uncomfortable things. But if you look at the legislation that comes through and what politicians do, you can just tell they don't have enough people in their circle that are challenging them. It's all one-way traffic, and the agendas flow through from the likes of the World Health Organization, through the bureaucrats who attend, the delegates who attend, back to the political staffers and through to the politician's desk in the form of a draft bill, because there is no one in that process that challenges what they're told from above.
Do you see, I mean, obviously it's can move quite fast and legislation is just like push through. Do you feel that the majority of representatives are across this legislation thoroughly, or do you feel like they're just kind of getting the abstract and then going based off of emotion?
They can't be across everything. The rate of change of legislation is too fast. We can have dozens of bills pass in 1 week, and some of those bills are 5, 6, 7, 800 pages plus a massive explanatory memorandum. So in our team, we have just 2 personal staff for Senator Babbitt, maybe being reduced soon. Actually, we've just got some notice from the Prime Minister's office, so we could have even less staff. And we need to be across every bill that comes through. But we take a simple approach, and that is, unless the legislation is perfect, it doesn't pass. We need to make sure that there are no potential unintended consequences. Otherwise, it's not worthy of voting for. No legislation is better than imperfect legislation. I think everyone should take that approach, because really the last thing Australia needs is more laws. And the thing that we never really see come through is repeal bills, repealing unnecessary legislation, unnecessary red and green tape, and liberating the people. Like, Jim Chalmers talks about a lack of productivity. You want to be productive? Get rid of some rules. Let people live.
I have to laugh at that because obviously I do a bit of work in the vaccine space and I'm like, yeah, I've never seen one of those taken off the schedule either. They seem to add them all the time, but it's never, we don't see this spread anymore. Let's take it away. Yeah, it's a strange thing.
Well, apparently there is a spread now. So
Oh, well.
yeah. So what are you seeing at the moment for what we can do to stop what's happening or stop this process before it gets to this point for Australia anyway?
Yeah, so politically, you can continue to lobby, you continue to just hold them to account and reveal the details. It takes time to change the hearts and minds of the Australian people. There's a couple of things you can do. So there's one rule in politics is that no one wins by yelling at the crowd. You can't tell people what to do. You can't tell people what to think. But I think what you guys do is excellent. You ask questions. And that's how we should be dealing with our neighbours, our friends, our family, with anyone who we want to start thinking about these issues. Is we begin with questions. We say, look, why, for example, Chloe, why is a vaccination schedule this way? Why do we get 6 of the same thing? Do you think that's right? Do you think we really need that many of those? And those questions can lead to those people then verifying the question that you asked and then maybe starting to dig a bit further. But I think as a populace, we need to continue to do our job with our peers and with our friends and family and spreading the truth. And then politically, we don't have the numbers. Like in the Senate, we have One Nation got 3 senators elected this time. We lost Senator Rennick, sadly. So now we've got about 7 good senators out of 76. So that's the numbers. We're sitting on about 10%. I'd say the general population would be about the same number. Like it's probably a pretty accurate representation of where we are. But we have an awful lot of politicians in the middle. I was speaking to George Christensen, a former member of Parliament, the other day, and I asked him, George, in the Liberal Party, there's a few that are good, Senator Antic, and you've got in the National Senator Canavan and whatever. How many would pat you on the back or say, good job, mate, quietly behind the scenes, but never publicly present themselves as being on your side? And that's at least half the party. There is a whole chunk of people that if the tide was going in the right direction, they'd be with you. So I guess it's on us just to persist, to keep going, and then to slowly turn that tide to the point where it's politically rewarding to run with the tide and to go with us. But it's a slow burn. But I sleep well every night knowing that I'm trying and doing what I can. I'm sure you guys do the same thing. It's not about getting those immediate victories. It's about just chipping away with that little axe at the big rock wall and slowly creating change.
Well, so this is evident of what a lot of people have been saying. I even seen it at the extreme of Trump saying on Rogan that there's just people who are survivors within the system who get into positions of power and they have to toe the line. They have to go with what the tide is, where the tide is taking them. And then there are outliers who push against it. Antic's a perfect example. He's great. He does do that sort of stuff. What interests me is what you just said there is, 50% of them would pat him on the back, but then publicly not back them. Who do you think at the top is really driving the tide, as you said? Who's the one who's pushing that direction?
I think it's easy to isolate one person and say they're the problem, Klaus Schwab or Dr. Tedros or whatever. And I think that's the easy way out. I actually think politically the issue in Australia is the emergence of the career politicians. So in the back of their mind, that's all they've got. That's their job. That's their career. It's all they've ever wanted to be. And if they want to remain in that role, they play the safe game. They take the easy path all the time rather than being a martyr like potentially Antic is. And, George Christensen was a martyr. So was Craig Kelly. So was Russell Broadbent in Victoria. He's a great man. I love Russell, deeply respect him. But they are the martyrs. They won't be rewarded. They won't be rewarded for their efforts. But what they've done is they've paved the way for others to step in behind them. So we need more people with conviction. We need more courageous politicians to step up and have a crack. At the moment, there's a few that are trying. Most of the good guys don't last long. They get weeded out. But there'll come a time when we have a critical mass of good guys in Parliament who will be able to stay the course because there'll be a weight of numbers. That's not the case right now, but it is slowly building. the major party vote is reducing. The Liberal Party's trying to reform in the likes of South Australia. Yes, they're going through an awful lot of pain as part of that process, but I think everyone's trying. We just need to make sure that we find a way to all work together. I love that phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And a lot of us do have a common enemy. We just choose to die on a hill that's not worth dying on far too often. We need to find more of a way to work together, or as Penny Wong would say, collectively. That's what the communists or the leftists always do, is that collectivist type movement where it's like, I don't really like what you stand for, but man, if we stood together, we can both get what we want. That's what they do. I'm not saying we have to compromise, but we have to not die on every single hill. That's really important.
So with the censorship stuff, that would be, I guess, chosen by the World Health Organization of what needs to be censored, what is considered misinformation, and that sort of stuff. Is that correct?
Well, certainly in relation to the pandemic or pandemic potential events, yes, they're allowed to kind of I suppose that's why the definitions in these documents is so broad, because then when these events crop up, it allows them to kind of zone in on the areas that they need to squash and then define so accordingly.
Now, would they look at themselves, and this is, I guess, it's hard to ask because you don't know what they would do, but let's play devil's advocate and say they look back on the pandemic and they acknowledge their problems and their issues that they faced and the things that they censored unnecessarily, and they would go, all right, well, we'll do it better next time. Is that something we could just hope for? Or is this like I think that might be all you have. It would just be a big bowl of hope, and then it kind of falling down around you, unfortunately. I think Corey's analogy the other day about how many times would you wake up with Bill Cosby and
oh, good grief!
You'd eventually start questioning it. But
sorry, that's a local larrikin, Michael. It's worth having a listen to.
He comes over to the Adelaide Fringe Festival once a year, so I know who you're talking about.
Oh, fantastic! You've seen him.
He's certainly not politically correct.
No, he's not. But the reference is still, you can't trust people if they keep making the same, doing the same thing over and over again. So I assume that's it. But so that's what we're essentially doing in the end result of a pandemic, or what they would consider a pandemic or a health-related emergency. They can start basically telling us how to handle that situation.
Well, so the misinformation or the spread of misinformation and disinformation, isn't it like considered a threat to public health under this framework? And within, I think it's the IHR side of things, they can put pressure on states that have agreed to squash that, and they're also monitoring it. So say Australia is not meeting the standard that the WHO have set for squashing misinformation, disinformation, they can then come in and say, we need you to do X, Y, and Z.
Now, what would be the end result if they said, no, we're not going to do that then? Do we know?
As in a state disagreeing, the penalties for it? That is a very good question.
Are we aware of
this? Yeah, this is where we get into a murky area. So, the word blinding is often used by the World Health Organization when they're talking. But, for example, in question time, when we ask the minister, are these new amendments and the pandemic treaty legally binding, or can they cede the sovereignty of Australia? They say absolutely not. So you sort of get two stories, right? But I think that doesn't actually matter. Whether it's binding or not binding, the problem is we've signed up to the World Health Organization. We've led the negotiation on these documents. We've convinced other member states to sign up to them. That's what Australia has done. We've taken the lead. And as a result, we're going to accept anything the WHO says is gospel, because I can tell you one thing for certain. Federal and state health ministers hate responsibility and they hate to be held to account. So if they can say that they've received the best advice from a higher authority, they're always going to do that. They're always going to say, we're only acting on the advice of the World Health Organization. They know best.
But we've seen that
before. They are our sole source of truth.
We've seen that before where they said we're acting on health advice, and a lot of it was based on no health advice. With Dan Andrews, for example, we see the situation has come that the curfews were based on zero evidence. And these sorts of things. So, yeah, but they can say that they were basing it on health advice, but those words are empty when they just say it and then don't show and aren't transparent about the health advice they're given. I think even Peter Collier, who I know pretty well actually in Perth, and he's I think he was for vaccination and he was for the lockdowns, but he was also for the transparency of showing us why these lockdowns and these measures have been taken. And I can't recall, I didn't follow it any further after, but it took a long time to even get an acknowledgement of what this advice was. And I think that was still pretty heavily redacted from memory. So why should we trust any sort of health advice?
There's no reason why we should trust any advice given what we've been through and the fact that we haven't been given a Royal Commission. The federal government did their own COVID inquiry, which was a total whitewash and sham, essentially. There was no accountability. There was no questioning of witnesses. There was nothing in that. It was junk. But one thing Senator Malcolm Roberts, did last year, which was actually really good, was he referred to committee the designing of a terms of reference for a full Royal Commission into the pandemic. And those terms of reference were returned. The committee was actually chaired by a Liberal member from Queensland, and they did a really good job. The terms I love. I wouldn't refute them at all. The only problem we have is we don't have a government that's willing to call the Royal Commission. So we've got everything ready to go but the actual Royal Commission. But that's where I'm going to ask people to be patient, because politicians don't care about politicians of yesteryear. They only care about themselves. So to get justice and to be able to achieve, the truth-telling that we really need around this issue, it might take 10 years. But in another 5 years' time, there'll be very few people in Parliament that were there in 2021. They'll be more than happy to throw the old guys under the bus because it's got nothing to do with them anymore. Let's just pray that we don't have a pandemic between now and then, because if we do, we won't have much to stand on. But time actually is our friend. That's why we must keep pushing.
So what role does the under 16 ban on social media play in age assurance? Because I've seen that they've finished their 8-month trial that they used on age assurance, and it was, from memory, using AI to discern whether they're within a certain age group. They had other methods, passports, licenses, certain things like that. And it was a trial they felt was pretty successful. But it's not perfect. So there's going to be refinement. How does this shape up for us when they say age assurance? Language is a beautiful thing. Does that end up meaning we all have to adopt digital ID just to be able to go on social media?
Well, in order to restrict under 16s from social media, you must identify everyone over 16. Because if you're under 16, you don't need to be identified. You just can't access it. So, yep, they've done their age assurance trial. It even includes like measuring your ligaments in your hands or something. They've got some alternate method to assess your age using AI tech. I don't know how it's going to work, but all I know is it's going to be a massive data collection exercise, and potentially over time intertwined with a digital ID. You think it would be inevitable, and if you have a look at My Health Record, for example, do you remember My Health Record is now been amended in 2025 via legislation earlier this year called Sharing by Default. So I'll just quickly walk you through the history of that. So in 2012, My Health Record was first created, and it was a voluntary opt-in process where your health records could be stored online and you could access them. In 2015, they changed the name to My Health Record and started some opt-out trials where you're defaulted in and you can choose to opt out.
I opted out.
In 2017, following those trials, they made it solely opt-out. So you're in unless you choose to opt out, but the messaging is terrible. No one knows they can opt out because it's not like they're going to promote it too much, right? You have to go and find that information.
How do we opt out?
And that meant that 90% of people were then on My Health Record by the end of 2019. And now they've gone to health providers, and legislation passed earlier this year, which we oppose, which forces health providers to upload all sorts of additional health information by default via threats of fines or punishments for not uploading that information for their patients. Patients can opt out, but patients don't think about that, do they? So your data by default is now being uploaded.
So how do we opt out, and can we then have previous information removed?
Yep. So you can go onto My Health Record if you log in with your MyGov, your digital login, and opt out of My Health Record and ask for the information to be wiped. Or you can still call, I think, the 1300 number from memory. That's the other way you can do it. But
now,
the thing is...
Well, I recently, and this is going into what you're talking about, I recently had an issue with my MyGov, and I have MyGov requirements because of my daughter. And it completely shut down my whole MyGov page and asked me to re-sign in, and I had to, we can do this very easily for you using a digital ID. And I said, no, I'm not keen on that. And instead of saying, well, here's the other option, they were just like, well, why? And I was like, well, that's none of your fucking business. It's a bit, I guess, invasive why you're asking that. You're just a fucking phone worker. And they seemed quite frustrated because they were like, well, it's a little more of a longer process, but you can do it, and we'll guide you through it, bang, 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 bang. And I got it done. I got back in. I created my thing. But most people, and I know people who have just gone, well, it's just easier to set up this digital ID, bang, done.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate part of it. It's interesting that you say that because I actually had an issue with my MyGov a few months ago. I had been on it previously when I wasn't working, and obviously had that information still there, but then I needed to access some tax thing and tried to log in, and it wouldn't let me, and it wanted me to submit all of my identifying information again. I took it as a sign of like, I'm going to be operating by phone from now on.
Yeah.
And I'll just be blocking up.
But
the
they were quite forceful. Well, this lady was anyway. I don't know. I'm not saying they're all like that, but this lady was very invasive and just like, and almost it was like an arrogance of like, why wouldn't you? Like, what are you afraid of?
Just to follow on though from what Michael is saying, like, I mean, obviously anyone who's listening, make the right decision for yourselves. But if you are like still able to opt out, because I opted out in I think 2015 when that was first signified, and then when my son was born, also had to opt him out so that he was kind of never on there. That was a big, was a very important thing for me. But we've also seen recently, and this is kind of crossing into the surveillance we were discussing with Katie last week.
Yeah.
Now there's a proposal being put forward that the newborn blood screening done when your baby's first day of life is also going to do where they're putting forward having a dual purpose for genomic sequencing as well. So within your child's first day of life and having that blood spot test, do you remember when Scotty was born, they pricked her foot?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that will now run a genomic sequence for babies that are born, and that will be like from 2030, I think. So it's not decided yet, but it's been put forward as a strong argument to move that direction, which is terrifying.
And look at this is a perfect example of someone who I would like to say I'm pretty well across and things, had no idea that was even happening. And number two, I didn't know you could opt out. So that's very interesting that's happening. And not surprisingly, they're not showcasing that and they're not putting it out there for everyone to learn. But why would they want all of your information? Is it under this guise of an idea that, well, it's all centralized information, so if it's required, someone can access it for you?
They claim that government is safer as well, right? We can't be hacked because we're the government, but as well as I do, if code can be written, code can be hacked. It doesn't matter whether it's government or private enterprise. It's the same thing. There's an argument for convenience. Yes, technically it might be slightly more convenient in the short term to have all the information in the same place and to have one digital ID and whatever, but it's also very convenient for government to be able to pull any lever at any time once they've got everything in the one place, right? They have total control, and I think that is the problem is we don't trust the government not to incrementally change things over time. So most things start off as completely voluntary, but actually end up being nearly almost mandatory, as close to mandatory as you can get. They'll always claim that things aren't mandatory, but there is a way to make something mandatory without mandating, and that is to reduce the services on the other side. If you have to wait 6 hours on the phone to get through to them, a lot of people will just give in and get the My Health record because they can't be stuffed waiting to take the phone call, right?
Yeah, so I guess convenience is a thing, and we see that with a lot of things. And how quick were we to adopt something like tap and pay on our phone because of convenience? So I can see how people would, one, accept it and would, one, again, also want it. But I guess to play devil's advocate, why can't we trust them? Like they could be just, we're trying to be convenient. We're trying to make this easier and more beneficial for everyone. Is this, I think I liked what you said there. It's less about this sinister conspiracy of controlling everyone, but moving and incrementally changing this mandatory things that we have no idea what happens in the future. That's probably the biggest concern.
Government is not benevolent. It's run by people with agendas. And I can tell you for a fact that you walk around the halls of Parliament and those orange lanyards, they dominate the place. And an orange lanyard means that you're a lobbyist. You're there to lobby on behalf of a specific cause, whether it be Big Pharma or Bayer or Monsanto or whoever you're employed by. Your job is to walk those halls of Parliament and influence the politicians as much as you possibly can. We keep our door closed. We don't like those guys walking around too often. We'd rather make our own mind up on most issues. But, lobbyists are very, very close to government. And government also like to be very close to the big corporates because a lot of them can actually do their work for them. For example, we've got how many trillion, maybe nearly $5 trillion in superannuation now. Jim Chalmers doesn't have to spend money on a certain project if you can get the super funds to fund it, right? So there is a way to work together to make both of their numbers better that benefits the politician, but also those that are close to the politician.
Well, let's move forward to what we see happening in regards to censorship and what that could mean and what penalties that could mean for us as people.
Yeah, because
I think it's pretty. Yeah,
I was just going to say because it's this beautiful thing, right? In terms of pipeline, you've got the WHO kind of dictating the definitions of what misinformation and disinformation is now, and putting pressure on those states to enforce compliance. Then underneath that, we had misinformation, disinformation bill last year. We've got hate crimes now. That's our kind of national level. We've got a digital ID that underpins that and says or identifies who is the dissenter, I suppose. And then we've got this perfect recipe because we then have under 16s and we're capturing the children for the next generation. So there isn't as much of a resistance because people are just used to that verification process.
Yeah.
It's slightly terrifying, and we have, this date that's looming and then a date of implementing it. Michael, I would love to know how you feel about that because we haven't seen any signs of pushback from the Australian government. We are having to episodes like this, we're hoping to put pressure on, but we're kind of accepting that, yes, we are going to be moving into this. And then come September 19th, these things are going to be enforced. And you're talking about time kind of being our friend. How do you see that transition period where we are going to have to, I guess, play a little more smartly underneath these legislative efforts?
I wish I had a crystal ball. I wish I
know
could see what
it's
the
not a
future
small
holds.
question for you.
No, it's not. Look, I think I want to raise that concept of civil disobedience as well. There is a time to disobey directions that come from your government which defy basic human rights. So as humans, we have a right to freedom of expression and freedom of political expression under the UN charters, right? So technically the UN should be protecting us around freedom of expression, but they're not exactly doing that too well at the moment. And I think that governments around free speech, there's a common thread every time when they try and censor speech indirectly, and it's always to do with fear and protecting a certain group. And children are a really big carrot that they hang out there for parents is, you must protect your children from the dangerous world of free speech. And don't get me wrong, there's some terrible actors on social media, and children addicted to social media is a terrible thing. But with our children, We don't have Wi-Fi at home. We don't have connected devices. They read books. We play outside. We kick the footy. We do all of those things. And I prefer to look at it on a local and a community level. Build your own community that's not reliant on tech. Spend time with your children. I work 2 jobs so my wife can stay home while our children are young, because that works for us. And it means that our kids are always supported and they're never raised by a stranger, because you have I think by the time your children turn 16, you've spent 90% of the time you're going to spend with them in their lifetime. You don't get that time back. So I make conscious decisions in my life that allow my children to be raised the right way with minimal tech. Government think that they can solve our problems, but we know they're not going to be able to. We know there's always a way around as well. People use VPNs. People use all sorts of technology now. You've got Elon Musk's internet service via the satellite, Starlink. Like, you've got all different ways to access tech. So I actually think tech moves too quickly for government to be able to properly regulate these things. They'll try. I don't think they're going to be overly successful, because tech is always miles ahead of them. Have a look at Bitcoin, for example. I wouldn't suggest that anyone put their life savings in it, but government, I never invested in Bitcoin early on. I understood what it was, but I didn't invest because I thought, government will regulate it, they'll tax it, it'll be worth nothing. It'll get to the point of any other currency where government controls it. They can't work it out. They still can't touch it. And it's been so many years now. So the reason I'm relatively optimistic is because I don't think they're inherently evil, most of the people that are in government. I just think they're stupid, but they also love their job, and they're a matter of protecting themselves and want to be seen to do something. That whole attitude of doing something, like we saw during the pandemic, stupid actions, but doing something gets rewarded politically. So whether they'll enforce this firmly, I don't think so without a major crisis. It's only a major crisis or pandemic where I think we'd really see the screws tightened again.
Yeah. It does concern me in particular from a personal perspective, as someone who's, hosting these sorts of conversations. What sort of fines would I face? What sort of reach would be silenced or suppressed? And this is my job as well now. So, but this is just me as a broadcaster, I guess you'd classify. But then there's people who would be just expressing their opinions on Facebook or Instagram that are going to be also punished, presumably, as well. And that is quite concerning in itself. So what does it look like? Is that a genuine reality, or is this something they'll tiptoe into, or will it just be like, nah, bang, you can't say this?
It already is a reality. There are laws all around the country that punish. For example, on my Facebook page, if someone comments something on my page that's defamatory or, potentially breaching a law, it's on me. It's not on them, because I didn't monitor that content. I didn't censor it. So it's on me. I'm responsible for their comment, right? So
I did not know
you might
that.
notice some politicians don't allow comments on their social media.
Yeah.
The reason they don't allow it is they don't want to accept that responsibility, that liability. We haven't seen test cases on those sorts of things. The question is, would the general public accept it? Because I think politicians will only go as far as the general populace will accept it. So they might accept it for a couple of niche issues at the moment. The big one they generally use is anti-Semitism. That seems to be the trigger at the moment that they can get away with. But just for maybe misgendering someone or something like that, something less serious, well, not serious at all, I don't think they're willing to push there yet. And politics is still downstream of culture, I'm sure of it. It's on us to restore our culture to what we want it to be and to not mince our words. I know myself, before I ran for Parliament, I used to bite my tongue. I don't bite my tongue anymore. People know where I stand. I speak plainly, because the moment that you decide that you're going to always tell the truth and always going to say what you think is the moment you start living. We should all live that way, and you sleep well at night and you know that you're trying to do some good in society. And I think if most Aussies spoke that way, these things wouldn't be a threat, because they just wouldn't be accepted by the culture.
Yeah. I mean, you see that I've been seeing that in a few people. of late, but then I still see, like, okay, for example, Rennick was a perfect example where I really appreciated his openness and honesty around certain situations. But then having had him on the podcast ourselves, then realizing he still is a politician and still bites his tongue on certain areas. All of them, everyone does to a point. So that is, I'm not sure I see it at this stage in our current, I guess, collection of senators and representatives. But are there people who, in your opinion, do?
Do bite their tongue or don't?
No, sorry. Do be their authentic self and say what they believe within that system.
I would say no one is 100% their authentic selves. Ralph's probably about as close as you get, and Pauline's probably pretty similar. But yeah, there are certain things that politicians probably wouldn't say because the threat to them personally is too big as well. You know, like those that are against you will do anything they can do to destroy you personally. They'll come for you, and that is a problem, I think, with the political system as well. Is that the personal cost of being a martyr is that you're technically unemployable for the rest of your life. I don't think Senator Babbitt would get too many jobs if he lined up. His only option is to start a business, because if you're not your own boss, you're not going to get a job. And the same could probably be said for Rennick and Hansen and a whole bunch of them. You've got to be your own boss, or there is no job for you.
But isn't that the point of this, pension that premiers and prime ministers and whatnot get? They're obviously going to have situations where they're not well liked in certain areas. So that is presumably a way for them to not have to work, not go into that space anymore. But then you have people like McGowan's a perfect example, taking in consulting opportunities with BHP and whatnot. Surely if you're taking on work after the situation, things like the pension taken away from you.
You would think so. So the pension doesn't exist federally anymore. I'm not sure how it works with the states and those sorts of things. So that's no longer a thing. But I guess politicians are human, and they do still have to feed their families and that sort of stuff. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that everyone who went into politics was probably a self-made man who had nothing to lose and could just give it everything and leave. And one of the proposals I would pitch is that maybe we should have term limits, because the career politician is the major problem. So if you were limited to, say, maybe 10 to 12 years in federal parliament, something like that, you're there for a limited period of time. There's no need to hold anything back. You know you've only got 3 terms or 2 terms. You have to give it everything, leave nothing behind, and try and affect some meaningful change. The trouble is you can sit in there for 40 or 50 years if you do the right thing and live a really comfortable life, but achieve absolutely nothing. And there are so many of those.
And then not have to answer to anyone, really. I like
Correct.
the idea of having that skin in the game, that you have to serve your people in a way that means you can, or like get a job after the fact, that you could walk into any building and be like, yes, this is my resume and here we go. I mean, it is a bit of a different conversation, because I do feel like that tide is changing, and I think over the next 10 to 15 years, politics is going to get very fun in Australia again.
Yep.
And it's been one of these things, obviously, we exist, or the three of us kind of exist in a bit of an echo chamber of people that do see challenges, obstacles, and want to push back against them. What would be your advice for getting people engaged on the local level with their politicians? I mean, I guess more so around this issue that's of the IHRs, that's what we're talking about today, but generally speaking.
I think people need to self-assess and work out what their strengths are. What are your subject matters that you really care about and you know? Because when you're lobbying politicians, you actually have to know your stuff. Like, there are so many people within our circle, I will call it our circle, that are stuck in that cycle of outrage and haven't moved on and professionalised and really sort of bedded down the facts and can talk calmly around issues and rationally to a normal person. And you need to be in that position before you try and do any lobbying, because if you're doing lobbying out of an emotional state, it's going to come across terribly, and you're not going to have the facts to back up what you do. But look, I wouldn't knock anyone who tries to approach their politician. Sending a generic email is useful, but not really. They generally just get filed away, and that's about that. A personalized email is better, followed up by a phone call, which requests a meeting, is even better than that. And it's only when you get face-to-face that you can really do anything of substance. And in that face-to-face, you don't need to kill the politician with detail, like the number of bills we have to read, that sort of stuff. It's mad how much stuff is in their head. But if you can just stick to the basics and really just sow those questions that I referred to earlier, those simple questions of asking why it is the way it is, asking them to justify certain aspects of a bill or whatever's happening is really important, because you want to hear how they respond. Politicians love to talk about themselves. Ask them questions, let them talk, because they love to hear the sound of their own voice. But as they talk, make sure you push that conversation towards the issue that you really care about, so you can work out where they stand. I can tell you right now, like, some of the people we get along with best in Parliament would be of a completely different worldview, but we all agree around sort of transparency, accountability, those big items like that. They're the most important things to the crossbench. You're talking sort of David Pocock and Lambie and all sorts of wild characters we have on the crossbench, but they love to hold the government to account as well. They have different issues they care about. Like, Pocock loves hugging trees. We're not so much inclined that way, but we all agree that the government is very secretive and hides a lot of details. So I think it's also important to pick the low-hanging fruit, and that's where it lies right now, in the transparency, the accountability aspect, and they're more than happy to look into an issue. For example, we got an excess mortality inquiry up in 2023, and that was a big issue for us. But we got the support of the crossbench because they had different issues, like Indigenous senators wanted to know about high Aboriginal death rates, and David Pocock was more concerned about, diabetes and things like that, and we were more concerned about medical interventions between 2020 and 2022. But overall, we still got the inquiry. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing.
So doesn't the idea of censoring questions concern you as well? Because that's what you've just said. We want to be asking questions. That's what I want to do. I want to pose these questions and have people in people like yourself, or positions of power, or people with knowledge, and ask them questions. But it seems like the future is doomed to be a place where we're not even allowed to ask or pose the questions. We just have to blindly agree and and accept what we're being told by one centralized body.
It does appear that way, right? And the legislation that has passed and is proposed further entrenches that potential future. But if you look back to, say, early 2021 and compare that to now, I would say the free flow of information is exponentially greater now than it was then. So I can see both sides. I can see the doom and gloom, the fact that the levers are already there to shut us all up, essentially, and force us to be quiet. But I can also see that fire that's been lit in so many people, especially young men. Like, I was talking to a young fella at our church on Sunday, and a few years ago he would have just been your average normie or whatever, but now he spends his whole life listening to podcasts and thinking and trying to discern issues, even around the most recent issues in Iran and Israel, trying to find where the truth is in the middle somewhere, and consuming all forms of media, which I love. The issue we have, like you said, is the potential for government legislation to limit what forms of information adults and especially children have access to.
Yeah, or podcasts are becoming one of those things. We're part of that system, and specifically locally, where we're getting more people listening and following our content than our local news networks, 7, 9, and 10. I'm hoping, and I see it in the future, even nationally, we'll be getting more views and influence than the mainstream media. But then I guess is that part of the orchestrated design, is to, like, they can see the shift there. They have their hands in the pie when it comes to the mainstream media. We have to shut up the people who are questioning our authority.
I think it is. There's a bit of self-interest in it, but I guess we're focusing on the World Health Organization today and sort of how they feed down policy to governments who still have to pass legislation. They can't force us to do something if we haven't legislated it. But then there is a concept that I'd like to discuss called state capture. It's something that there was a study released on state capture following the pandemic and how the agreements with the pharmaceutical companies, which forced countries to grant indemnity, which is essentially saying, we'll take the financial risk, you just sell us your product and we'll pay you for the product with no risk, constituted state capture because the poorer countries had no leverage and they were forced to grant indemnity to the big pharmaceutical manufacturers in order to receive their product. And my question is, if they're using that word binding, which the WHO are regularly, and the WHO recommends something and that requires us to pass legislation, does that mean that our state is somewhat captured by the World Health Organization? I would say yes. The government would flat out deny that every time you ask them, no, we retain our sovereignty. But that sort of soft pressure, considering that we're a signatory to the World Health Organization and they're recommending something, or not recommending, they're asking us to do something very nicely, and we end up passing that legislation, I'd say that we've been captured by an external authority.
Which I suppose, I mean, I guess we're talking cost next time as well, but again, probably wouldn't be as nefarious a thing if it was just states at the table, each with an equal stake, looking after their people. But we're seeing that private partnership and influence as well. And another question I would follow on from that one is probably who the WHO is captured by.
Very good question. So the WHO obviously receives a large chunk of its funding from private sources, much like our Therapeutic Goods Administration. I think the TGA is about 96% funded by pharmaceutical companies.
Yes.
Now, that can be misrepresented. It is a cost recovery mechanism. So what happens is they pay a fee for a service to the TGA, but irrespective of how you spin it, my understanding is that he who holds the gold makes the rules. So if you're paying, even if it's indirect or unconscious bias, there is going to be some form of bias there. Obviously, the WHO receives massive contributions from the likes of Bill Gates, etc. The member states supply contributions as well, plus voluntary contributions on top of that. I think wherever there is money changing hands, whether it's intentional or not, there is going to be some sort of loyalty or bias afforded to the source of funding. It's just human nature. He who holds the gold makes the rules, like I said, and if you're supplying the money, you're going to receive something back in return. It's inevitable. That's the way that humans operate. We're very transactional. If someone's giving me a chunk of money, I'm going to be somewhat loyal to them, aren't I? That's how we see lobbyists. It's how we see donations in politics clouding the judgment of policy and legislation. You see it all the time. There's always a link between those that are funding and the outcomes that are being achieved. It may not happen straight away. It may be subconscious, but it's there and it does happen.
Do you think it's all sinister? Do you think it's orchestrated? Or do you think that it's just the reality of how the world works in regards to sometimes people work to benefit themselves?
I would say that is human nature. And I think it's been the same since Roman times. Nothing has really changed with the way humans operate. We don't tend to learn from the past. We tend to continue to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Being a finance nerd, I look at the housing market all the time and I just can't believe how unaffordable houses are, for example. But everything that government does to pretend to make the issue better actually makes it worse. So it's always demand-side stimulus, more money, more demand, not more supply. It's all about demand, more immigration, more grants, bigger loans. Everything they're doing makes it worse. It doesn't make housing more affordable for future generations. And the same can be said for interventions in the health space. When's the last time the government focused on preventative health or promoting chiropractors or naturopaths or those that actually seek to understand the cause of your health ailments, not masking the symptoms? It's the amount of money that's allocated to that is minimal, and actually they spend a lot of their time trying to destroy those alternate providers and almost sort of show them as being quacks. But in reality, a lot more people get healed naturally than by just providing something that will mask the pain but not address the symptom.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going through that situation closely at the moment with regards to a separate issue, but cancer related, and the role chemotherapy is playing in it. And then after doing the numbers, seeing the benefit of the chemo prior to a surgical intervention was next to nothing. And then tinfoil hat on there, you're like, well, if you're doing 5 bouts of chemotherapy, I think a chemotherapy is about $100,000 a pop. So you can start to see, well, there's some follow the money. You understand what they're doing. It does make things a little easier in certain cases, and this is not a slamming chemotherapy, but this is just an example where you can see that sometimes financial gain can be prioritized over prevention and these sorts of things. So I understand where you can see it all coming from this. I wouldn't say like a conspiracy, but it's just almost it's just the way things work.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's easy to become sort of disenfranchised with all health as well, and I would urge people not to do that. So I'll give a personal example of an amazing thing that's happened to our family this year. So my daughter's 5 years old. For 5 years straight from the day of birth, she had seizures every day, up to 100 a day. So absolutely shocking epilepsy. She was on drug upon drug upon drug. They couldn't find the cause, but then we went and got a second opinion in Melbourne last year. Amazing neurologist, amazing surgeon. They found the source. It was a huge risky operation that took 12 hours, but we decided that the benefits were going to outweigh the risks. Since the day of surgery 4.5 months ago, she's not had a single seizure. She's now back on the basic level of drugs and moving towards zero. And she's gone from a girl that could barely speak to asking full sentences, singing, talking, and catching up to the other kids at her level rapidly. So we are so blessed and so thankful. And I'm actually thankful of having gone through that period because it gave me a great appreciation for life. But observing my daughter's strength through that, like it never bothered her. That was her life. That's just how she lived. But also it's restored my faith in neurology, the medicine of being able to, they disconnected chunks of her brain. Hasn't affected her at all. It's only been positive. But like the level of knowledge those surgeons had was absolutely amazing. So there is a lot of good in health, but also there is also a lot of monetization of medications which aren't really health. They are for profit.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's less a question and more a kind of comment following on from that. And we've alluded to it, but our focus in this conversation has kind of been censorship of the individual, but that also is squashing scientific debate and, the experts that we saw kind of pushed out throughout the pandemic, and alternative health practitioners pushed out of their careers and unable to practice. And, it's stories like that, like Michael, we've just stated, your family asserted themselves and went, we need to address this issue. Let's seek out a path that we feel comfortable with. That's something that's also at risk because those things won't be out there as much if we are kind of put into a pandemic proportion situation, fake, whatever we're referring to it as. Yeah. And that is something that is so worth preserving. It makes me so happy to hear that. I'm really, really glad for you.
Yeah, it's amazing. And like if you look at the pandemic, when they rolled out those mRNA products, for example, right? So we rolled it out on the whole population, irrespective of age and with minimal testing. But if you look at mRNA and gene therapy, what it was originally designed for, if you've got someone that's got, say, a 50% chance of dying, but there's a chance that a gene therapy could aid their ability in living, that might be a risk worth taking. It's that risk-benefit analysis that matters. You don't want to take a risk on healthy populations whenever possible, because healthy populations don't need that risk.
Yeah, and that you're both very on the money there with throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to, like, the medical system is, especially here in Australia, is we shouldn't complain. We have an incredible healthcare system compared to a lot of other countries. Doesn't mean we can't put more effort into it, but squashing medical debate and those sorts of things is the perfect example of why censorship and questioning shouldn't be it shouldn't be part of what we're trying to squash.
I think this has also kind of given me it's not a different feeling from what I had before, but just the way that you've spoken about it, Michael, I certainly am taking away more of a steadiness and a fight around how I feel in this issue of there's a kind of contrarian or like a pushback feeling of being, told what to do, and centralization is something that I oppose. I respect the rights of the individual, but that can also come from a place of pushing back against the authority of it. Whereas talking today, it's more government's role to serve, and it's so apparent that doesn't seem to be the attitude and that they are gods. But just this idea of we deserve better than like a kind of homogenized health system that is just for serving their laziness and, making it as cheap as possible for them, because one size fits all now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's something that feels a little bit different in the heart about it, of like the people of Australia deserve better than lowest common denominator, bare minimum in terms of their health care. We deserve that freedom of choice and to seek out the options that we see fit based on our own personal risk benefit analysis.
Oh, I like that. That's perfect. We've
got to affirm the positive messages as well, not just, name names and point fingers at the men behind the curtain.
Yeah, well, 100%. I guess we're probably winding up. We've covered a fair chunk. What does it look like going forward? What's the I guess the first point of call? We've mentioned July 19th, and what's the process that happens going forward there?
So July 19th, the last year's international health regulations will become officially a thing, and then Australia will have to enact what they're asking us to do under those international health regulation amendments. We've got the pandemic agreement, which I think next year needs to be ratified by member states.
Keep
but
pushing
there's
that
still
one back.
one detail they're working on, wasn't there, Chloe? That it's a minor detail from memory. What's it called again? Just looking it up here. It was minor, not.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a pathogen access and benefit sharing system, which is essentially a system whereby you're learning that you're sharing pathogens of potential pandemic emergencies. So the problem I have with this is that the World Health Organization hasn't been honest about the failings of the past few years. They're doubling down on what actions they took, and now their focus seems to be sort of almost tunnel vision on pandemics rather than preventative health. And, like type 2 diabetes is reversible. Let's focus on that. That would improve health an awful lot. I could talk about that forever, but, there is low-hanging fruit like that is going to exponentially improve the lives of Australians and the whole world. But instead, they're sort of narrowing their focus on pandemics. And I think that does have something to do with money. I really do, because the big players in the world have made an awful lot of money out of indemnified vaccines. They've accepted all the money with none of the responsibility. And here we are, they're like, that was quite a good sugar hit. If there was another one, we'd like to replicate that. And I think the WHO has been impacted by that, obviously. And they're just far too focused on pandemics. And Australia is in a much more fortunate position than pretty much any other country in the world, because we're an island. We can choose to not accept people from overseas if we think there is a genuine threat of a pandemic, and that's okay. We don't really have to enforce all of the measures that the WHO might be recommending for a country, say in Europe or Asia or somewhere like that, where you have common borders. Australia is unique, and that's just another reason why we should retain authority over our decision making around these things. But look, July seems like it's going to happen, but just keep whinging, keep pushing, and then pathogen access benefit sharing system has to be completed before the pandemic agreement is ratified. I think it's maybe in May next year from memory.
Yeah, I assume it would be at the next assembly with the IHRs coming into effect in the interim. Oh, goodness. that's such a nice place to kind of wrap it up. And then I'm just going, oh, but now they're going to be testing the pathogens again. I mean, I think it's also just a really nice thing to remind people that zoonotic spillover is something that, occasionally can happen, but in the traditional sense is incredibly unstable from going from an animal source to a human one. And it generally needs to be bolstered. And I suppose my concern with all of these samples that will be stored in labs and being tested for their potential may increase their potential.
Yeah.
And look at that.
Yeah,
Just like that, we created another
gain of
market.
function yet or not? We're still pushing ahead with gain of function.
They retracted that because it was quite explicit in one of the drafts of last year. Katie was speaking on this last week. So the language got stepped back a little bit, but again, remains broad enough that if required, I'm sure it's something they would bring in to manage it. So,
mate, we certainly appreciate your time and yours again, Chloe. I didn't thank you last week for coming on as the co-host while Delby's at home.
No, I just love being here and being part of it all. It's lovely.
It's lovely. Is there anything you want to plug, mate, or any last words you want to sort of leave us on?
I just want to plug you guys. I love what you're doing. I ask people to keep supporting you, sharing your content. But please do take an interest in politics. It can be really boring at times, but unfortunately what they do in Canberra and in your local parliament really does affect your life longer term. And the only reason they get away with garbage bills is because people take no interest and pay no attention to it, and the media don't cover it like they should be covering it. So it's on us. The misinformation, disinformation bill was a great example of the people power. There was massive opposition to that publicly, and there's no reason why that can't be replicated, right? We can do it if we put our mind to it.
Yeah, mate. I appreciate your time. Chloe, you want to leave us with anything and plug anything?
No, I've never got anything to plug, but I'll see you again soon because we've got a third one of these. So
it should be good, mate. I really appreciate your time, and thanks again.
Thanks, Cameron. Thanks, Chloe. Love to see you.
Cheers.